The Democratic Party's path forward. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the conversation. I'm David Schuster. There has been a fascinating discussion and debate within the Democratic Party for months, which has intensified, of course, with the power that Senator Joe Manchin has had in the US Senate. And that is, should Democrats to be successful legislatively, politically, move more towards the center, or should they move more towards progressives and the left? Well, somebody's got a pretty strong opinion on that, joins us today. Brittany Ramos DeBarros, she is a progressive candidate in the Democratic primary for New York's 11th congressional district. She will face off against Max Rose, who is more of a centrist Democrat in the primary in June. And then the winner will take on a woman by the name of Nicole Malliotakis. She is a Trumpster through and through, and that will be in the general election. Brittany, thanks for joining us. First of all, if I understand it correctly, you campaigned on behalf of Max Rose's behalf in 2018. So why take him on now?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here. I'm an organizer, and I'm, a person who has always been really invested in making sure that everyday people and everyday families are best positioned to get their needs met. And the reality is I knocked doors as a volunteer for Max in 2018 because we had another Trump Republican representing us at that point, and we needed to get him out. He was also the DA who, really refused to prosecute Eric Garner's murderers. There were just a lot of reasons why he, in my opinion and in the opinion of many here, was not really meeting our needs. And so even though I had critiques of Max Rose, then for me, it's always about practical solutions for our communities. And that's also why I'm running now. At the end of the day, what I've seen over and over is that, many people talk about this as a spectrum of left, right, and center. But explain to me, what is the center position on people going hungry in our district? Explain to me, what is the center position on people either being kicked out of their homes because they're too poor in these layered crises that we're facing to stay in them, or they don't even have gas for months like many of the families here have. So for me, this is really about fighting for the people. And I think that that's really a fight of top versus bottom. It's the 1% and corporations versus the rest of us. And that's what
it also seems like a fight, at least according to people on the right, that it's a question of, well, should the government be solving these issues, or should it be left to private charities and private enterprise to sort of tackle some of these problems? It would seem like that Max is a little bit more towards, well, maybe the government should not be as ambitious as you would like it to be. Is that a fair assessment?
I don't know. It's difficult for me to understand his positioning, to be honest, because that's not something that I think he has really prioritized campaigning on. So there are a lot of places where I'm really not sure what his ideological beliefs are. And what I know is that, he's talked about as a centrist. Okay. He also ran multiple pro-Trump ads in his attempt to pander to that Trumpism in order to get elected, and still lost as an incumbent with a fundraising advantage. And so, I'm really not here to talk about him and the strategies that have failed us in the past, other than to say that we have to do something different, right? And I think that doing something different means really understanding why people have the concerns that they do. People here are concerned about the role of the government, and for good reason. Many of them feel that both parties have let them down for a really long time and have not really been fighting for them. And that's why I say this isn't really about left versus right or red versus blue. For me, this is about how do we deliver on the practical things that everyday people need. And I think that government, the role of the government makes the question kind of scary and big and inaccessible. But what we're really talking about is, how do we want our collective resources to be spent? That's what our tax dollars are, right? That's what our elected officials are, is people responsible for stewarding our collective resources. And I want them spent on housing, education, addressing climate crisis, good jobs, infrastructure, right? And I think that that's what most people want.
Well, let's take a couple of those issues, because as Staten Island, the 11th congressional district, has long been held for many, many years by Republicans, moderate Republicans like the Molinares, more far-right Republicans like the person who holds it now. But given the demographics of the district, and that it has been a traditionally sort of moderate Republican kind of congressional district, make the case, why should moderate Republicans, independent voters, people who don't identify with either party, why should they care about, for example, climate change, or about something that you describe as care, not criminalization, in terms of people who are caught with drug offenses or whatever it may be?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that the case I actually have to make is why they should care. They already care, I mean, we have had amazing organizers and families and mothers and so forth in our district advocating for investment in care in our district for a really long time. We are some of the most intensely impacted by the overdose crisis in New York City, and yet we are losing beds in rehabilitative facilities rather than gaining them, right? We have some of the harshest health outcomes in the city, including some of the highest COVID case rates, and we don't have a single public hospital here. And like most of the country, many families are dealing with or facing, going bankrupt over medical bills in one of the wealthiest cities on the face of the planet, right? There's no reason for that everybody doesn't have a basic floor for medical care that they can afford, that they have access to, right? And so I think that these things are already actually popular in our district. The thing that we have to overcome is that many people are checked out. They've lost faith in politicians, in parties, in the government, because they've been so let down for so long. They've heard promise after promise and just not seen people really deliver, which is why I think that someone like me, people came to and asked me to run, because I have a history. When I was an Army officer, I stood up, I risked my career, I risked my freedom to call out the corruption that I was seeing both within the military and in DC that was affecting not just the military and veterans, but people overseas and our communities right here at home, right? And I was going to ask you about your military background, because it does make your story even sort of more interesting. What was it that turned you against, for example, the Afghanistan war? I mean, you were on duty, you were seeing things. Was there a particular moment or realization, and what prompted it? Yeah, I think it was a lot of things. I went there as a true believer. I was a platoon leader responsible for 40 lives. I really thought that I was going to fight to protect innocent Afghan people from the bad guys, right? And that I would fight for democracy and freedom. And yet what I saw there was that we were so obviously adding to the violence and doing so much more harm than good. And I saw the way that corporations were running the show. And one example of that is, when I was a maintenance platoon leader, I will never forget sitting in a combat zone, right? Tasked with this responsibility, supposedly, to uphold our national security there and at home as a commissioned officer. And I had an entire platoon of mechanics who had the knowledge to fix deadlined vehicles that rendered one of our platoons that was a critical platoon non-mission capable, and had all the equipment to do it. And they were legally barred from making that platoon functional again, because there were corporate contracts that said only corporate mechanics could work on those vehicles. And I came home confused and disillusioned. I saw corporate contractors there making hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then you had active duty military troops on food stamps. There are almost 40,000 plus estimated active duty military on food stamps. And so that's why it's so important to me to talk about the fact that half that massive military budget is passed under the guise of supporting the troops and supporting national security. And yet half of it goes to these corporations that are just making bank, when that money could be put back into canceling student debt, into healthcare, and things that we know actually make us safe and secure. And so, for me, that experience was incredibly powerful. I also saw that, the military has a particular purpose. It is meant to leverage violence, to maximize violence as effectively and efficiently as possible to serve that particular end and function, right? And we should stop kind of kidding ourselves about the role of the military to be a nation builder, a democracy builder, right? All of those things. And I saw that you can't just take an institution meant to do violence and tweak it to make it a peacekeeping organization, right? And I think that when you see politicians like my opponent, Max Rose, calling for the National Guard to be called to the ports, or calling for the National Guard to be mobilized to our hospitals, you really see the cost of the fact that we have only invested in that institution in terms of federal jobs programs and other kinds of initiatives. And we really need to invest in other things that also have national security impacts and impacts on the overall wellness of our communities here.
And of course, it's a responsibility of Congress to try to figure out what to prioritize. Let's just suppose you beat Max Rose for the Democratic primary in June, and then you beat Miss Malliotakis, Nicole Malliotakis, in the general election in November. And let's suppose that Democrats, you're part of the reason Democrats are able to hold control of the US House. What would you say to Nancy Pelosi, if she is still the speaker, in terms of what the priorities for the Democratic caucus should be?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the priorities need to be democracy and campaign finance reform. We're seeing really concerning erosions of our basic democratic rights and rights to the vote that are very concerning and need to be addressed immediately. We also need real reforms to the way that campaign finance works to make it more accessible to working class people like me, right? I'm already behind on my personal credit card because I'm, a paycheck to paycheck person. I have student loans myself. My husband does, and you can't take a salary or a stipend when you're running at this point in the campaign, and that's incredibly concerning. There's no matching, right? But beyond that, I think that those things open the door for us to pass things like a Green New Deal, Medicare for all, canceling student debt, and investing in a career, cradle to career pipeline of education investment and investment in our families.
Brittany Ramos DeBarros. She is a Democratic candidate for New York's 11th congressional district. The primaries in June, the general election would be in November. Brittany, thanks for joining us and good luck to you.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you, everyone, and happy holidays.
Sure.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.